The divine architect's plan for your changing relationships. Don't miss this. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when familiar faces begin to feel distant, when conversations that once flowed effortlessly now require effort, when the warmth of certain relationships cools without a clear explanation, and in that unsettling quiet, a question rises that most people are afraid to ask: why is everything changing, and why does it hurt this way? What if these shifts are not accidents, not betrayals, not failures of love or loyalty, but deliberate movements within a design far greater than human emotion can comprehend? What if there is an unseen architect behind the rearrangement of your relationships, adjusting connections not to punish you, but to prepare you? Consider this carefully, because throughout history, moments of relational loss have often preceded moments of profound transformation. When paths diverge, it is rarely because one person has failed another, but because the season that required that connection has quietly ended, and the next season demands something different from your spirit. Most people assume that relationships end because of conflict, misunderstanding, or personal flaws, yet research in psychology quietly echoes an ancient spiritual truth: human beings evolve in stages, and bonds that no longer align with our inner values naturally weaken over time. Long before modern science observed this, spiritual tradition spoke of divine timing, of doors closing so others could open, of pruning branches not to destroy the tree but to help it bear fruit. It is unsettling to realize that sometimes the people you love most are not meant to walk with you forever, not because the love was false, but because its purpose has been fulfilled. The divine architect does not build randomly. Every connection is placed with intention, every removal executed with precision, even when it feels abrupt and cruel from a human perspective. Think about how often growth begins with discomfort. Muscles strengthen only after strain, wisdom emerges only after confusion, and clarity arrives only after uncertainty. Relationships follow the same pattern. When someone exits your life unexpectedly, your first instinct may be to blame yourself or them, but rarely do we ask the deeper question: what part of me was this relationship sustaining that I am now meant to outgrow? Some relationships exist to teach you safety, others to teach you boundaries, others to teach you resilience, and some to awaken you to your own worth. Once that lesson is integrated into your being, the relationship no longer needs to remain, and forcing it to stay can actually delay your spiritual progress. There is a quiet truth few talk about: not every relationship that leaves your life is meant to be replaced. Some are removed to create space for solitude, because solitude is not emptiness, it is a classroom where the soul learns to hear itself. In those silent seasons, when messages stop arriving and invitations fade, many people feel abandoned, yet this is often the moment when the divine architect draws closest, teaching you how to stand without leaning, how to love without dependency, how to exist without external validation. Loneliness, when interpreted correctly, becomes refinement. It strips away the noise so you can finally recognize your own inner voice. Have you ever noticed how relationships often change right before a major life shift, as if something unseen is clearing the path? People drift away before you step into a new calling, conflicts arise before you outgrow an old identity, and misunderstandings surface before a deeper truth is revealed. This is not coincidence. It is alignment. The universe, or if you prefer, the divine intelligence that orders all things, rarely announces its plans loudly. Instead, it rearranges quietly, nudging certain people out of your orbit while guiding others closer, often without explanation. This subtle orchestration ensures that when you arrive at your next destination, you are not weighed down by attachments that no longer resonate with who you are becoming. What makes this process painful is that humans are wired for attachment. Our nervous systems associate familiarity with safety, even when that familiarity limits us. Studies show that people often remain in unfulfilling relationships simply because predictability feels less threatening than change. But spiritual growth requires courage, and courage is rarely comfortable. The divine architect understands this paradox. It allows relationships to fracture not to cause suffering, but to expose where you have confused comfort with destiny. It is also important to recognize that not all relationships end permanently. Some are paused, placed on hold until both individuals evolve into versions of themselves that can meet again without repeating old patterns. Distance, in such cases, is not rejection, but recalibration. Think of it as two instruments being tuned separately so that when they play together again, the harmony is deeper and truer. However, this reunion only happens if both parties honor the growth required during the separation. Without that growth, returning too soon only recreates the same dissonance. Another truth rarely acknowledged is that as you elevate your awareness, your tolerance for certain dynamics naturally diminishes. Conversations that once felt engaging may now feel draining. Humor that once entertained may now feel hollow. This shift does not make you superior, it simply means your inner frequency has changed. The divine architect does not force you to abandon these connections abruptly. Instead, it allows discomfort to surface, signaling that it may be time to release without resentment, to let go without judgment, to bless what was while stepping forward without guilt. People often ask why endings feel harsher when they are spiritually significant. The reason is simple: transformation demands surrender, and surrender challenges the ego's desire for control. When a relationship dissolves outside your control, it humbles you. It reminds you that not everything exists to serve your comfort. Some things exist to shape your character. In this way, relational loss becomes initiation, a threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. There is also a sacred reciprocity at play. As you release relationships that no longer align, you make space not just for new people, but for new versions of yourself. The divine architect understands that you cannot step fully into your purpose while clinging to identities that belong to the past. Some people knew you when you doubted yourself. Some only recognized the version of you that needed their approval. As you grow, remaining in those dynamics would require you to shrink, and growth never asks you to shrink. It asks you to expand, even if that expansion feels lonely at first. Perhaps the most surprising realization is that some relationships change not because you or the other person have done something wrong, but because your roles in each other's lives have evolved. Teacher becomes friend, friend becomes stranger, stranger becomes guide. These transitions feel unsettling because they challenge our need for permanence. Yet impermanence is the very nature of existence. Even stars burn out, galaxies collide, and oceans reshape coastlines. Why then do we expect human connections to remain unchanged forever? When viewed through this lens, changing relationships are no longer tragedies but messages. They ask you to reflect on what you have learned, what you have outgrown, and what you are being prepared to receive. They invite you to trust a plan you cannot yet see, guided by an intelligence that understands your journey more intimately than you do yourself. The divine architect does not remove. If you find yourself grieving connections that no longer feel the same, allow that grief. Grief is not weakness, it is acknowledgement. But do not mistake grief for failure. You have not failed because someone left. You have not lost your worth because a bond changed. You are simply standing at the intersection of who you were and who you are becoming, and intersections are always chaotic before direction becomes clear. In time, you may look back and realize that the relationships that ended were not taken from you, but completed. They served their purpose, delivered their lesson, and exited respectfully, even if the exit felt abrupt. And the relationships that remain will feel lighter, truer, and more aligned, not because they are perfect, but because they resonate with the person you have grown into. So when relationships shift and the ground beneath your emotional world feels unstable, remember this: architecture requires demolition before construction. The divine architect is not dismantling your life, it is redesigning it. Every changed connection, every fading bond, every unexpected distance is a brushstroke in a masterpiece you are still becoming. Trust the process, even when you cannot trace the pattern. The plan is unfolding, and you are exactly where you need to be. As the design continues to unfold, there comes a quieter understanding that settles beneath the noise of confusion, a realization that not all movement is meant to be explained immediately. Some truths are meant to be felt long before they are understood. You may notice how certain memories resurface during this time, moments you once overlooked now glowing with new meaning, as if your past is gently whispering confirmation that nothing was random. The conversations that ended abruptly, the friendships that faded without closure, the connections that dissolved despite your efforts, all begin to reveal a hidden symmetry. Each ending carried within it the seed of a beginning, even if you could not recognize it then. Growth often disguises itself as loss because the human heart resists change, even when that change leads to expansion. There is a subtle strength that emerges when you stop chasing explanations and start trusting alignment. You no longer beg for clarity from people who cannot give it, and instead, you listen to the quiet intelligence within yourself. This shift is powerful because it marks the moment you stop outsourcing your worth to relationships that were never meant to define you. The divine architect uses this stage to teach self-trust, because without it, every future relationship would be built on unstable ground. When you learn to stand whole on your own, you no longer enter connections out of need, but out of choice, and that distinction changes everything. You may also begin to notice how your emotional reactions soften. What once triggered fear now invites reflection. What once caused resentment now inspires understanding. This does not mean you feel less, it means you feel more deeply and with greater clarity. Emotional maturity is not the absence of pain, but the ability to sit with it without letting it distort your sense of self. The relationships that remain during this phase tend to feel calmer, less dramatic, more rooted in mutual respect than emotional dependency. This is no accident. The divine architect refines not only who stays in your life, but how you show up in theirs. There is a profound moment when you realize that some people were never meant to walk beside you, but rather to walk ahead of you, clearing a path, or behind you, reminding you where you came from. Others appear briefly, like markers along a road, confirming that you are moving in the right direction. When you release the expectation that everyone must stay forever, relationships transform from anchors into teachers. They no longer weigh you down, they guide you forward. Even conflict, when viewed through this lens, becomes sacred instruction. Arguments reveal boundaries you didn't know you needed. Disappointments expose expectations you were unconsciously carrying. Betrayals, painful as they are, strip away illusions and force you to confront truth without filters. The divine architect does not cause harm, but it allows truth to surface, because truth is the foundation of any structure meant to last. Without it, everything collapses eventually. As your awareness deepens, you may find that you are drawn to different conversations, different environments, different energies. What once felt exciting may now feel empty, while what once felt intimidating now feels magnetic. This is alignment in motion. Your inner world is shifting, and your outer world is responding accordingly. Relationships cannot remain static when the individual within them is evolving. Resistance only prolongs discomfort. Acceptance accelerates growth. There is also a gentle invitation hidden within these changes, an invitation to forgive not just others, but yourself. Forgive yourself for staying too long, for leaving too soon, for not knowing what you know now. Forgiveness loosens the grip of the past and frees your emotional energy for what lies ahead. The divine architect understands that bitterness corrodes the soul, and so it nudges you toward release, again and again, until you choose peace over resentment. In moments of reflection, you may begin to see how every relationship mirrored something within you. Some reflected your fears, others your strengths, others your unhealed wounds. As those inner aspects evolve, the mirrors change. This is why holding on to certain relationships feels like trying to live in a house you've outgrown. The ceilings feel lower, the walls tighter, the air heavier. You were never meant to stay confined by what once sheltered you. Eventually, a quiet gratitude emerges, not because everything turned out the way you wanted, but because everything shaped you into someone more aware, more grounded, more authentic. You begin to appreciate the precision of the design, how even the most painful separations redirected you toward greater alignment. The divine architect did not remove love from your life, it refined your understanding of it. Love becomes less about possession and more about presence, less about fear of loss and more about shared growth. As you move forward, relationships feel less like tests and more like collaborations. You no longer seek validation, you seek resonance. You no longer cling to what is fading, you invest in what is flourishing. This is the reward of trust, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are guided, even when the path curves unexpectedly. So if you find yourself standing at the edge of change, watching familiar connections shift and dissolve, remember this truth deeply: you are not being abandoned, you are being aligned. The design is intentional. The timing is precise. And every relationship that changes is gently guiding you closer to the life you are meant to live, the version of yourself you are meant to become, and the deeper peace that comes from trusting the unseen hands shaping your journey. As the alignment deepens, something subtle but powerful begins to take root within you, a sense of inner permission. Permission to stop forcing connections. Permission to stop explaining yourself to those who no longer understand your language. Permission to let relationships evolve naturally without labeling every change as failure. This is where emotional freedom begins, not with isolation, but with discernment. You start recognizing the difference between people who walk with you out of habit and those who walk with you out of harmony. The divine architect gently sharpens this discernment, not so you judge others, but so you honor yourself. You may notice that your silence grows stronger than your explanations. Where you once over-communicated to preserve bonds, you now trust that what is meant to stay will not require you to betray your inner truth. This shift is often misunderstood by others. They may interpret your calm distance as coldness, your boundaries as rejection, your growth as arrogance. But this misunderstanding is part of the process. Not everyone is meant to understand your evolution, only to be influenced by it in ways they may recognize much later. There is also a deeper spiritual recalibration happening beneath the surface. When relationships change, your identity shifts with them. Roles you once played no longer fit. The caretaker, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who always compromises, these identities begin to dissolve. And in that dissolution, a more authentic self emerges. This self is not louder or more aggressive, it is quieter, steadier, and more rooted. The divine architect knows that before you can build lasting connections, you must first dismantle the false selves you created to be accepted. At this stage, patience becomes your greatest teacher. Not patience with others, but patience with the unfolding of your own life. You stop demanding immediate clarity and start allowing understanding to arrive in layers. Some insights come quickly, others take years. You may only fully comprehend why a relationship ended long after it has faded, when you finally stand in a place that would have been unreachable had it remained. Hindsight becomes sacred, not because it justifies pain, but because it reveals purpose. Interestingly, as you release attachment to specific outcomes, new forms of connection begin to appear, often unexpectedly. These relationships feel different from the start. They do not rush intimacy or demand proof of worth. They feel spacious, respectful, and aligned. Conversations flow without performance. Silence feels comfortable rather than threatening. There is mutual curiosity instead of control. This is not luck. It is resonance. You attract what you have become, not what you wish to be. You may also begin to feel compassion for those who could not grow with you. Not pity, not superiority, but understanding. Everyone is navigating their own design, their own timing, their own lessons. Some are meant to stay in familiar patterns longer. Others are called to disrupt them sooner. The divine architect does not rank journeys, it orchestrates them. When you accept this, resentment softens, and gratitude quietly replaces it. One of the most profound realizations at this point is that love does not diminish when relationships change. Love simply transforms. It shifts from proximity to memory, from interaction to impact, from presence to influence. Some people leave your life but remain part of who you are, woven into your values, your wisdom, your emotional depth. Their absence does not erase their significance. It completes it. There is also an invitation here to trust your intuition more deeply than ever before. As external validation fades, your inner guidance grows louder. You sense when to lean in and when to step back. You feel when a conversation is nourishing and when it is draining. This intuitive clarity is not accidental. It is the divine architect handing you the blueprint to your own boundaries, teaching you how to protect your energy without closing your heart. Eventually, you may reach a point where change no longer frightens you the way it once did. You understand that stability does not come from unchanging circumstances, but from an unshakable sense of self. Relationships may evolve, environments may shift, roles may end, but you remain grounded because you are no longer defined by what surrounds you. This is liberation disguised as loss, strength disguised as surrender. And so, when future changes arrive, as they inevitably will, you meet them differently. You do not panic. You observe. You listen. You allow. You remember that every alteration in your relational world is part of a larger intelligence working not against you, but for you. The divine architect is not dismantling your life piece by piece, it is refining it, aligning it, elevating it. In the end, what remains is not a perfect network of relationships, but a deeper harmony within yourself. You become someone who can love without attachment, connect without losing identity, and let go without bitterness. You walk forward knowing that whatever stays is meant to stay, and whatever leaves has already given you what it was meant to give. This is the quiet power behind changing relationships. Not chaos, not punishment, not abandonment, but design. A design that leads you, patiently and precisely, toward wholeness. As this wholeness settles in, you begin to notice something almost unsettling in its calmness. The drama fades. The emotional highs and lows that once defined your connections no longer dominate your inner world. This can feel strange at first, because intensity is often mistaken for depth, and chaos is often confused with passion. But what replaces it is something far more powerful: clarity. You start seeing people as they are, not as you hoped they would be, not as you needed them to be, but as they truly are. And in that seeing, attachment loosens its grip. The divine architect does not remove illusion gently, it allows truth to speak for itself until you can no longer ignore it. You may also realize that many of your past relationships were built during moments when you were still discovering yourself. They were shaped by survival instincts, by fear of being alone, by the need to belong. As you grow more secure in who you are, those foundations naturally weaken. This is not a flaw in your past self, it is evidence of progress. You did what you needed to do with the awareness you had then. Now, with expanded awareness, you are called to build differently. There is a subtle courage required at this stage, the courage to disappoint others by choosing authenticity. When you stop playing roles that kept the peace at your own expense, some people will resist. They may try to pull you back into familiar dynamics, reminding you of who you used to be. But the divine architect has already moved you forward. Returning would feel unnatural, even painful. Growth changes your nervous system, your emotional thresholds, your sense of self. You cannot unknow what you now know. At times, you may grieve not just the loss of people, but the loss of versions of yourself that existed within those relationships. The you who laughed differently, loved differently, needed differently. That grief is real and valid. It is the mourning of an identity that no longer fits. But within that mourning is also liberation, because you are no longer required to maintain a self that was built for a chapter that has already ended. Something else begins to happen quietly. You stop taking relational changes personally. You understand that people leave not always because of you, but because of where they are headed. Paths diverge when destinations differ. This understanding dissolves shame. You no longer ask, "What's wrong with me?" but instead, "What is this making room for?" That single shift in perspective transforms pain into curiosity, and curiosity into wisdom. As your emotional landscape stabilizes, you become more intentional. You choose connections slowly. You listen more than you speak. You observe patterns instead of rushing to conclusions. The divine architect teaches you that discernment is an act of self-respect. Not everyone who enters your life deserves access to your inner world, and that boundary is not cruelty, it is care. You may notice that even when relationships end now, they do so more gently. There is less chaos, less desperation, less need for dramatic closure. Sometimes things simply fade, and that fading feels strangely peaceful. This is not numbness, it is acceptance. Acceptance that life moves in cycles, that energy shifts, that holding on too tightly only creates suffering. In rare moments of stillness, you might sense gratitude for the endings that once broke you. Without them, you would not have developed the depth you now carry. Without them, you might still be chasing validation instead of cultivating alignment. Without them, you might still be confusing attachment for love. The divine architect does not waste pain. Every wound, when tended with awareness, becomes wisdom. And so, as you continue forward, relationships become reflections rather than definitions. They enhance your life, but they no longer determine your worth. You can love deeply without fear of losing yourself. You can let go without losing your humanity. You understand now that connection is not about permanence, but about presence, about meeting each other honestly in the time you are given. When future changes arise, and they will, you meet them with a steadiness that surprises even you. You no longer ask why things must change. You ask what they are teaching you. You trust that if something is being removed, something else, perhaps not immediately visible, is aligning itself into place. This is the mastery the divine architect was guiding you toward all along. Not control over relationships, but harmony within change. Not certainty about outcomes, but confidence in your ability to navigate them. You are no longer afraid of shifting connections, because you know now that you are not losing pieces of yourself, you are returning to yourself. And in that return, you finally understand, the plan was never about who stays or who leaves. It was about who you become through it all. As this understanding deepens, you begin to sense a quiet reverence for timing itself. You stop rushing people to meet you where you are and stop slowing yourself down to keep others comfortable. Timing reveals what force never could. When someone is meant to grow with you, the rhythm feels natural, unforced, almost effortless. When they are not, every interaction feels like swimming against a current. The divine architect uses time as its most precise instrument, allowing distance, delay, and pause to reveal what words never could. You may find yourself becoming more selective with your energy, not out of fear, but out of respect for your own inner balance. You understand now that your attention is sacred. Where you place it shapes your inner world. This awareness gently shifts how you show up in relationships. You are no longer available for dynamics that require you to abandon yourself. You no longer negotiate your values for acceptance. This does not harden you, it softens you in a way that is rooted in self-trust rather than self-sacrifice. There is also a newfound humility that emerges, a recognition that you, too, were once part of someone else's season. Just as people have moved in and out of your life, you have done the same in others. This realization dissolves blame. It replaces it with compassion. Everyone is both a teacher and a student, both a guide and a passerby. The divine architect weaves these roles seamlessly, ensuring that no encounter is wasted, even if it is brief. As you reflect, you may notice how your inner dialogue has changed. Where there was once anxiety, there is now curiosity. Where there was once resistance, there is now surrender. This surrender is not resignation, it is alignment. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you do not have to control the narrative for it to unfold meaningfully. You trust that what is meant to reach you will find you, and what is meant to leave will do so without diminishing you. At times, you may still feel the ache of missing someone, even when you know their absence is aligned. Growth does not erase longing, it contextualizes it. You can miss someone without needing them back. You can honor what was without reopening what has closed. This emotional maturity is one of the most profound gifts of the journey. It allows you to carry memories lightly, without letting them weigh down your present. You also begin to understand that some relationships were mirrors showing you how to love yourself better. They revealed where you gave too much, where you settled, where you ignored your intuition. In this way, even painful connections become allies in your evolution. They highlight the work you were meant to do within yourself, long after the relationship itself has ended. Gradually, you stop fearing the unknown spaces between connections. You no longer rush to fill silence with noise or absence with distraction. You recognize these spaces as fertile ground, places where clarity takes root and intention becomes refined. The divine architect often works most powerfully in these in-between moments, when nothing seems to be happening, yet everything is aligning. As your sense of self stabilizes, relationships begin to feel less like anchors and more like shared journeys. You walk alongside others without gripping their hands too tightly, trusting that if paths diverge, it is because both are being guided where they need to go. This is the true signature of the divine architect's plan, not a life free from loss, but a life resilient enough to transform loss into meaning, change into clarity, and endings into quiet beginnings. And within this quiet resilience, you begin to notice how your inner world feels less crowded. Thoughts move more slowly. Emotions settle more gently. You are no longer constantly bracing for loss or grasping for reassurance. There is a subtle confidence that grows when you realize you can survive endings without being undone by them. The divine architect was never trying to harden your heart, it was teaching your heart how to remain open without being fragile. You may find that your definition of loyalty has changed. Loyalty is no longer about staying at all costs, but about staying true, to yourself, to your values, to the season you are in. This shift can feel radical, especially if you were taught that endurance alone equals love. But endurance without alignment leads to quiet resentment, and the divine architect favors honesty over obligation. When loyalty is rooted in truth rather than fear, relationships become cleaner, lighter, and more respectful. There is also a deepening of presence that occurs. You listen more fully when you are with someone, because you are no longer distracted by the anxiety of whether they will stay. You show up as you are, not as someone trying to secure a future outcome. This presence is magnetic. Ironically, when you stop clinging, connections either strengthen naturally or release themselves without force. Both outcomes serve you. At times, you may look back and marvel at how desperately you once tried to hold certain relationships together, how much energy you poured into preserving what was already unraveling. This reflection does not bring shame, it brings compassion for your younger self. You were learning. You were loving the only way you knew how. The divine architect honors that effort by transforming it into wisdom rather than regret. You also begin to sense that your life is less crowded but more intentional. Fewer people have access to you, but those who do feel more aligned, more real. Quality replaces quantity. Depth replaces intensity. You no longer measure connection by frequency of contact, but by how seen and grounded you feel within it. This discernment protects your peace without isolating your heart. There is a sacred neutrality that develops toward change. You no longer label it immediately as good or bad. You observe. You allow. You trust that clarity will arrive when it is needed, not when your impatience demands it. This trust does not make you passive, it makes you responsive. You engage with life as it unfolds rather than trying to dominate it. You may notice, too, that your compassion expands beyond your immediate circle. As you understand your own journey more deeply, you recognize the silent battles others are fighting as well. You become less reactive, less defensive, less quick to judge. This does not mean you tolerate harm, it means you respond with wisdom instead of woundedness. The divine architect refines not just your relationships, but your character. In moments of solitude, there is no longer a sense of lack. Solitude feels spacious, even nourishing. You use it to reflect, to recalibrate, to reconnect with what matters most to you. You no longer fear being alone, because you are no longer abandoning yourself when others are absent. This inner companionship becomes the foundation for every healthy connection that follows. And when love enters your life again, whether in familiar or entirely new forms, it does so differently. It is not urgent. It is not consuming. It does not ask you to disappear inside it. It invites you to remain whole. This kind of love recognizes that two complete individuals walking together is far stronger than two incomplete ones clinging to each other for survival. Eventually, you stop asking when things will settle permanently. You accept that permanence was never the promise. Presence was. Growth was. Alignment was. The divine architect was never designing a static life, but a living one, dynamic, responsive, and deeply intentional. So you continue forward with a quiet confidence, knowing that whatever relationships remain are meant to remain, and whatever shifts will do so with purpose. You trust that every change carries intelligence, every ending carries instruction, and every new beginning carries possibility. This is not the end of the design. It is the ongoing expression of it. And you, aware now of the pattern beneath the chaos, walk on with clarity, grace, and a heart strong enough to welcome change without fear. And as this awareness settles into your bones, you begin to live with a softer urgency and a deeper trust. You stop asking life to guarantee outcomes and start allowing it to shape you instead. You understand now that the purpose of changing relationships was never to leave you empty, but to leave you honest. Honest about who you are. Honest about what you need. Honest about what you can no longer accept. The divine architect was guiding you toward emotional adulthood, toward a love that does not beg, a connection that does not trap, and a self that does not disappear for the comfort of others. You realize that every relationship that shifted did so to teach you something irreplaceable. Some taught you courage. Some taught you self-respect. Some taught you how deeply you can feel. Some taught you when to walk away. And even the most painful ones taught you that you are stronger than the fear of loss. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was meaningless. Every connection was a chapter, and every ending was punctuation, not erasure. Now, when you look ahead, you do not look with fear. You look with openness. You know that people will still come and go, that love will still stretch you, that change will still arrive unannounced. But you also know that you will meet it differently. You will meet it grounded. You will meet it awake. You will meet it without losing yourself. And that is the quiet miracle hidden inside every shifting relationship, the return to your own center. So if this message resonated with you, if it put words to something you've been feeling but couldn't explain, if it brought even a small sense of clarity or peace to your heart, take a moment to acknowledge that. You're not alone in this journey. And if you want more reflections like this, more guidance, more depth, more truth spoken gently but honestly, then stay connected. Like this video so it can reach others who need it. Share it with someone who may be struggling through change right now. And subscribe, not just for content, but for a space where growth, faith, and self-understanding are honored. Remember this as you move forward: changing relationships are not signs that you are failing at life, they are signs that life is working on you. Take what you've learned, carry it with grace, and step into what's next with trust. Your journey is unfolding exactly as it should, and the best parts are still ahead.